Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for Alberta Council's Defence webinar. We are joined here today with Christopher C. Miller. Chris is a former U.S. Secretary of Defense, and he previously served as the director of the National Counterterrorism Center. We're also joined today by the Honourable Peter MacKay. Peter MacKay is a former Member of Parliament who served as the Minister of Justice and Attorney General, the Minister of National Defence, and the Minister of Foreign Affairs. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Great to
Is
be
there
with you,
anything
Emily.
you did not do in the Canadian government?
Kind of makes me
Peter?
feel like I couldn't keep a job. though,
Holy
Chris.
cow, no man, impressive.
We appreciate you both for being here. Thank you, Chris. I have not introduced myself. I'm Emily Kniedeman. I'm the Director of Health here at Alberta Council. We're very excited for you both to be joining us. We have two experts in this sector. We have quite a variety of questions for you, so we'll get started right away. This is for both of you. I think maybe we'll start with Peter. Both of you were at a roundtable and fireside chat earlier today with a variety of stakeholders, from government to Indigenous relations to private industry. And I just wanted to start off by asking, what were some of the key takeaways from that roundtable and fireside chat earlier today? Starting with you, Peter.
Well, thanks, Emily, and thank you to the Alberta Council for the invitation to be with you and to give me the opportunity to attend this event, which I thought was extraordinary. I have to say a word about my friend Chris here, though, my new friend, and how great it was to have him there and giving us a unique American perspective. Chris has served in the armed forces at a very high level, too, which gives us all, I think, a great appreciation of this newfound intention to properly fund the Canadian Armed Forces. And part of the reason to do that, of course, is the cooperation and the collective responsibility for the protection of the North American airspace, borders, and everything that NORAD represents. And so much of what we talked about today is this huge opportunity that exists. And Alberta Council is to be commended for recognizing this. The timing is exquisite. And what was talked about in both the open sessions and the breakouts was how to capitalize, how to use Alberta's unique position in the country geographically, the experience that exists here, in large part the industry and tech expertise that came out of the oil sector that has application to military investment. Your universities here, which are interestingly really moving forward to embrace the opportunity, the large population of military personnel who have served in places like Cold Lake and CFB Edmonton and Suffield. And looking out over the entire landscape, I think Alberta's government too is very much embracing this as a moment in which Alberta can really strive to fill the need, fill the gap in some cases, in the area of military invention, military investment, and the relationships that exist across different levels of government and the private sector. So Alberta, I think, can really be at the forefront of this very unique Canadian moment where the federal government has, pardon the expression, awakened to the importance of military investment.
Perfect. Thank you. Over to you,
Alberta
Chris.
Council has absolutely the best tagline, lawyers and lobbyists. I love that. Who came up with that? Was that your idea?
Absolutely.
Marketing
Yep.
genius. Alberta is literally, I'm preaching to the choir here, is the keystone for North American defense. Right here it all comes together with NORAD, North American Air Defense Command. Our two countries, I'm the poor cousin from the South. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it to be part of this and listen in. Here was my takeaway from this morning. Like, something really, really special is going on here. And what I'm seeing is a convergence of money, attention, technology, interest, resources, all coming together at one place at one time. Today was the inaugural session. I think next year, I was humbled and privileged to be here, to be with you, Peter. And then to think next year, there'll be 100 people. In 2 years, you're gonna have 300. The problem with this thing is can I use a hockey analogy?
Oh, please.
love
No,
that.
will I
Please.
get run out of the country? Will
No,
I
no.
have problems getting out
Never.
of the country?
No.
It'll
You
help
sure?
the next time you come in,
Yeah.
actually.
But you got to
Okay,
let us
I
win
don't
the
wanna be
Stanley
on the
Cup
watch
once in a while.
list. I do not want to be in the watch list. My takeaway was we're kind of early in the first period right now. Recognition, the game has started. There's a lot of things coming together. And it really, that forum today, those were the initial players that are going to take this to the next level. I was really, really motivated. Saw huge opportunity. Businessmen now out of government like you are, Peter. So kind of have a different perspective now. And I just look at what's happening here with, you brought it up, unbelievable educated population, a desire, a recognition finally. Like, we went through this phase where we're like, oh, perpetual peace. It was the end of history, remember?
Right, the peace
Remember?
dividend.
We're old, Emily. We're old. And the peace dividend, right? Everything was going to be great. And there was no more hatred. And guess what? We now have the Russians starting the largest land war in Europe since World War II, where our nations, fought side by side. And it's that recognition that I think is really powerful. So what I saw today was literally the start of something really, really powerful. The thing is, it always comes down to execution, right? Oh, we had this great conference. It was great. A lot of people exchanged cards and met each other. But it's really what's going to happen next. Like, how do we operationalize this? How do we, it's all about execution.
Can I pick up on
Yeah.
that? Because I think that is really the salient takeaway, is that this is going to be a bit of a journey, because we are playing catch up. In terms of where America has placed its priority in terms of the defense of the Western world, they've carried much of the load. We're full-fledged and in fact founding members of NATO. We're partners in NORAD. As Chris has said, we are in other international bodies, including the Arctic Council, and we should talk a little bit about the Arctic and Canada and America's role, along with our Arctic Council participants, in what we do to fill the void of this massive vulnerability that's happening in the Arctic with the opening of ice, and what that means to be as proximate to Russia, and having countries like China declare themselves as Arctic neighbors or near Arctic neighbors. But this issue, and I'll use another good hockey analogy because we're in Edmonton, and the great philosopher and hockey player Wayne Gretzky said, go to where the puck is.
So true.
Skate to where the puck is. And where the world is going is very much in a bit of a defensive posture now. We've recognized that Russia has become hyper-aggressive in going into Ukraine. China in the South China Sea and the Straits of Taiwan are menacing, along with other neighbors in the Asia Pacific. We've seen, again, a full-blown conflict in the Middle East. There are no less than 9 conflicts raging on the continent of Africa. And then there's cyber. And these prolific attacks into our systems, into our institutions, into the monetary systems of government. This is also unseen and not well understood by a lot of Canadians and Americans, I would suspect. And that's also under the responsibility of government and the Department of Defense for the most part, is what do we do to set up our defenses? And so these discussions require a lot of really brilliant people, but they also involve massive resources. And so an open-ended question that I have, and it came up, I think, in some of the discussion today, when we're talking about the order of magnitude, billions of dollars being invested into our defense infrastructure, new equipment, the human part of our defense, so that we can have great soldiers like Chris who devote themselves to the defense of freedom and democracy and our country's interest. Where's that money come from? And in Canada's case, in the near term, it's got to be resources. And so stroking big checks, billions of dollars, if we're drawing on an overdrawn account, which is where we are today, I would suggest, not in a partisan way, but poor policy around the management of our resources, essentially leaving it all in the ground.
Right.
If we want to get in the game of defense investment, we need to pay for it responsibly so we don't shift that to the next generation.
Okay.
Emily,
So, yeah.
I don't want to, like, this is your world. We're just living in it.
Yeah.
Let's go hockey. Are we down by
Okay.
a goal or 2 goals? Where do you think we are?
2.
We're down by 2?
I think you can get us back there, Chris.
Wayne Gretzky can get us back.
If he-
Is he coming back?
No, he's not coming back.
Back.
But we've got McDavid.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right.
Yeah, we have
So
McDavid.
you seriously, we're down a bit, but
Yeah.
it's recoverable. But this is the period where you have to decide what you're going to do in the second, third period.
And we got to
Otherwise-
come out of our own end. I mean,
Yeah.
defensively, Canada has spent a lot of time behind our own blue line, especially in the cyber world. We have to be able to, this is not to suggest that we're launching against others. We're in a defensive posture for a reason. But the way things are trending, our adversaries are also making a lot of investment and a lot of effort, and they don't play by the same rules, by the way.
Right.
You know, democracies believe in the rule of law. They believe in respecting international covenants and boundaries. That seems to have very much faded away in recent years. And it's, again, it's not a new phenomena, but now it's breaking out in
Right.
ways that we have to be more prepared. It's
Yeah.
urgent, and I would say your generation, quite frankly, are much more dialed into this reality than maybe the previous one that came through this Cold War era that
Yeah.
Chris alluded to.
Well, I appreciate the points on, we're sort of in the first period of this hockey game. We're going to keep using hockey analogies for this entire hour.
No, is
so-
that all right?
Yeah,
I feel
that's
bad.
the theme
Like-
of the
like,
webinar,
yeah.
Chris. Thank you for that. So we're going to go on that and we're going to say, okay, we're at the start of this, and we see, maybe a little bit of a sense of urgency in the sense that this was the first time the government of Alberta had mentioned defense in the mandate letter, and that's a really good signal for the province to be focused on it. So you had mentioned, Peter, resources. This is a very resource-intensive industry in order for us to get where we need to be. So how can Alberta position itself with the federal government as a resource-rich province that is innovative, that has incredible talent, that now has a mandate from the provincial government to focus on this sector? How do we position ourselves with the government, similar to US states like Pennsylvania, Texas, Virginia, that have done a really good job of partnering with their federal government to build this defense ecosystem? What can Alberta do to position ourselves to say, look, we can be a leader in this space? How do we do it and work with the federal government?
Well, I'm tempted to say, listen to what Alberta Council is saying and promoting it and talking about it, and not in a boastful way, because I don't think Albertans, and I would say the same of my home province, tend to be boastful, but they're raging realists. And they recognize that the game has changed, things are shifting. But this idea of being fiscally responsible, I think, is also bred in the bone here. And the government of Alberta, has been raising alarms about how Ottawa has been, trending into their areas of jurisdiction. You mentioned the resources aspect of all of this. I mean, it's staggering to think of the amount of money that is out there for the resources that Alberta and other parts of the country can provide to the world. What does the world need? Food, energy, water. Now, I'm not suggesting we're selling water, but there are definitely commodities that we have not capitalized on as far as getting out there and selling it to the world. I mean, I don't want to go too far down this road, but look, had we been able to compete with LNG in European markets, in India, Pakistan, and eaten the lunch of the Russian energy sector, we could have literally collapsed their economy and maybe prevented them going into Crimea in 2014. Easy to look back on it. But that's the order of magnitude, trillions of dollars that could be coming into this country that can be reinvested in our military, in other forms of energy. And Alberta has been the hub. Alberta's really been there alongside Saskatchewan, and we know the same can be said of critical minerals. There's a tremendous untapped potential. And I think Alberta, more than other parts of Canada, is aware of that, but the federal government has actually stood in the way. And we're cautiously optimistic that things are changing. The MOU that was signed, that recognition in terms of our military and doing things differently, doing business differently. But communicating that and keeping the public on side.
Right.
And you're far more adept, I'm sure, than I am at social media, but now this can go out unfiltered to those who are paying attention. It doesn't have to go through the I don't want to say censoring, but sort of the filter that a lot of the media sometimes use to use clips. You know, people want the full story.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that comment. Chris, having worked in the U.S., you saw a lot of states do a really great job on wayfinding with the federal government. Are there any tactics or sort of pathways the Alberta government can follow to get to a place where it needs to be in terms of really demonstrating it has those resources?
Can I use
Another hockey analogy?
Hockey analogy?
Sure,
Absolutely.
let's just keep
Goodness.
doing, yeah.
First off, thanks for asking that question, because if you're going to ask me about Canadian politics, that's like the Churchillian riddle inside a mystery inside a, yeah. I love following your politics. Oh my gosh, it's
There's a program, you know, you can get into that'll help you get off Canadian politics. I went through it twice.
oh yeah. You're still recovering.
I'm still recovering.
Well, speaking of, you going to do it again? Sorry. That was your question. I wanted to use the Gretzky analogy of where the puck's going. If I could, maybe I talk about that. I think it might be helpful to those that are thinking about investment methodologies. They're thinking about their strategies, like how do we go forward? I know we have some government listeners as well that we're going to cover in a minute. By the way, I'm from Washington, D.C., Northern Virginia. Don't tell anybody. I can't afford to live downtown. No one can. Well, some people can, obviously. But in my case, I did see Ovechkin tie the record, of course.
Yeah.
And it was so neat to see Wayne Gretzky there. That was like, what a class act, you know.
So gracious.
You know how you're like, you want your heroes to be all that, and then you learn about him. Sometimes you're like, what a scumbag. Wayne Gretzky will never say that about. It was such a class act that he supported the game and he supported Ovechkin. But let's talk about where the puck is going. We're in the midst of a fundamental transformation in how we do national security and defense in the United States. I strongly believe, you know, one of our closest partners and allies, of course, here in Canada. What we're seeing is a change from the old days where you had these exquisite weapon systems that were made in Texas, in Los Angeles, and a few other places. Seattle, Boeing. What we're seeing, though, is those exquisite systems are being replaced by mass. So, you know, right now a $10 million tank can be destroyed by a $250 drone. So we're seeing the cost curve is changing. The issue is that, you know, the defense industry and our strategists and our policymakers, it takes a while to shift. But what we're seeing is a transition where the traditional model, where everything was decided in Ottawa or at the Pentagon, where, you know, all these, you know, very serious government employees and uniformed service members would say, we need a new tank. The tank will have, you know, 6 road wheels, 155 millimeter cannon. It all came down from the top and it had to be centralized managed. What we're seeing is a complete inversion of that. So where's Alberta right now? Those places that have not traditionally been part, you know, kind of like the known entities in the defense sector, like I'm guessing Montreal. Where else is the defense sector?
Winnipeg, Bristol Aerospace, East Coast shipbuilding, and of course C-SPAN, Irving on the East Coast, C-SPAN on the West Coast, and Davie. So we have 3 yards and a national shipbuilding strategy. But you're right, it's been concentrated in certain areas in the country. And if I could just pick out, I don't want to interrupt your flow,
No, you're not.
But you're absolutely
Please, I'm
right.
begging you.
But you're absolutely right, Chris, to say that this whole paradigm shift that's happening, driven much by what we've seen in Ukraine, Emily, where they've gone to the equivalent of Canadian Tire to get material and peace, and, you know, using bubble gum and barbed wire to put things together that are deadly efficient. They had an operation in Russia, Operation Spiderweb, where the cost of drones, they swarmed drones, this is all now very much, it's no longer classified, but they put them in the back of a dump truck. And they were made, some of them were made out of wood, and engines that were for model airplanes and various things. And they put hundreds of these drones in trucks that drove deep into Russian territory and then released them remotely. They did somewhere in the range of $4 billion in damage to the Russian Air Force, with maybe an investment of 200,000. And so that's both fascinating and terrifying from a Western perspective, because if an ally like Ukraine, in defense of their territory and in defense of their people, can do that, you can be sure that our adversaries are also looking at that model and looking at that shift as you've described it. And so it's changing a lot of the traditional thinking. Now we're on the cusp of ordering, building with others new submarines. You know, the long and winding road and saga of the F-35 fighter jet replacement. We've obviously identified some need for a missile defense shield of sorts in the north, and that again we'll touch a bit on the Arctic. But all of these are eye-watering price tags. And so there's a lot of thinking now going on in the Pentagon and at our Department of National Defense as to, okay, we need mixed fleets now. We need to have some of the traditional tanks and big guns, but we also need to look at these autonomous weapon systems for both, you know, offensive and defensive purposes.
So if I was an SME and I'm sitting listening to this webinar and I'm hearing you talk about this inversion of how procurement is happening and how, you know, drones made out of wood, and I'm thinking, oh, well, I make drones up with a 3D printer. I want to get involved in the defense sector. How much of a mammoth of, you know, an ordeal is that for an SME to say, you know what, I want to look at defense procurement as an opportunity? Is it even feasible or possible for a small, medium enterprise in Alberta or Canada?
You know, you kind of hit on the fact that non-traditional companies, maybe a machine shop or a software studio or something that normally would always sub out to one of the major defense contractors, that's no longer the case. The challenge right now is the status quo exists for a reason, because, you know, our military, the way we buy equipment and the way we think about war fighting, you know, you want our militaries to be conservative. You don't want them to chase the shiny object, you know, rabbit over there, chase there, because these decisions have life and death consequences. If you make the wrong call on a type of ammunition or a software suite, that can result in our nation's treasure being, you know, shattered, injured, killed, and ultimately could have existential threat to our democracies. So, but things are changing, and the forces of the status quo are finally recognizing that we have to do things differently. So what we're going to see is a decentralization of production, because you brought up making a drone. Hey, the kid across the street can make a first-person view drone in his basement. The question, can he scale it? But when we talk about scaling, we're not talking about a 450,000 square foot facility. We're talking, you know, something that's a normal, you know, industrial park would have of maybe 80,000 feet, and you could be producing with additive manufacturing, which isn't always the answer. Everybody always wants to go to additive manufacturing. Let's 3D print things. Actually, the cheapest way oftentimes is going old school and bending metal. But here's where I'm going with this. We used to have very, very particular niche technologies. We had a flip after the end of the Cold War, where more investment, research and engineering investment, was being done by industry than it was the government. Here's where we are with that right now. We have so many exquisite commercial off-the-shelf products. Let me give you an example. Right now, if you have an interceptor that's going to kill the Shahed drone, which is the drone that the Iranians make, that the Russians shoot 500 a night into Ukraine with, the sensor on that costs typically $15,000. A LiDAR sensor off at the GM plant is $100. So we have commercial off-the-shelf technology that can be integrated into a very effective military solution that's meeting a capability gap. So back to your question, that doesn't need to be done in just a few pockets. What we've seen in Ukraine, and we've seen, this always happens anytime there's a big war, you have to decentralize your production because you don't want these huge targets. So this is happening whether we like it or not. So your question though is like, how do you get into the defense space? It is so wicked, hard, and painful and difficult because of the trappings of bureaucracy, all put in place by good people that it made sense at the time. Like, actually, we need to have a 65-page policy about any time you plug this into that. You brought up cyber. I mean, these are realistic and legitimate
See, in
things.
Canada, we have white papers.
Yeah.
And then if that doesn't work, then we have a royal commission. And
Yeah.
these things are absolutely the gum in the wheels of progress. They slow things down. And I think you're right, they were well intended, but it's an antiquated system. And the agility to move and to make things happen effectively for industry, let alone for military, requires, as the old saying goes, for government to get out of the way and let the private sector respond. And I think Alberta, more than any other place, maybe Saskatchewan too, they get that instinctively.
Right.
You know, they're not looking to government to solve every problem. And so with this demonstrative need for the private sector to work with the military, some of it involves delegation of authority. And I think that came up a couple of times in the sessions today, allowing, and the Defense Department hasn't always been good at it, allowing those in the military at what they call ADM MAT, materiel, to make decisions at a higher level, like for $50 or $100 million for certain things. You know, if you're buying boots or uniforms or backpacks, that's one thing. But some of these investments are not massive anymore when you're talking about drone technology or buying a certain new innovative technology to apply over a communication system or night vision goggles. Those decisions shouldn't have to go through every single department in government, which can be cross-threaded. I talked about how Public Works, Industry Canada, the Treasury Board, the PMO, and then in the midst of these siloed mandates, have the overlay of politics. You know, how will this play in Quebec versus BC versus Newfoundland? So trying to decouple some of these political imperatives as opposed to the national defense imperative, working seamlessly and interoperably with our allies through NATO, through NORAD. We talk about it, and we talk endlessly about red tape reduction and efficiency, but it doesn't happen. You know, our special forces, who are really, and you were in the special forces, and you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. They have they're given the authority in many cases to do more of this innovation on their own. Not to make do with less, but to take initiative to make things happen in a much higher altitude of efficiency. And you know, we need to spread that, I think, across our defense departments, and also bring in the private sector in their confidence to make better decisions about where those investments go, but to move things along. Because we have this urgency now. And the public, by the way, have bought in.
Right.
The public want these things to happen.
So I used to be an Army Green Beret, Special Forces, big deal.
It is a big deal, you know?
And work closely with Canadian Special Operations Forces, brothers in arms. So I really got into deception.
Yeah.
And here was my deception idea. In the United States, we have a thing called the Federal Acquisition Regulation. It's literally like this tall off this table, well, probably off the ground. And I said, we should make the Chinese Communist Party think that the only way they can succeed is to adopt the United States acquisition system. We'll
Paralyze government.
We'll paralyze government. What we're seeing, though, and you talked about it earlier, and I think this, our two militaries are so closely integrated.
Yeah.
The deputy commander of our Northern Command is Canadian officer. So what I'm seeing in the United States military right now, I talked about things being flipped in its head. Right now, brigade commanders, they usually command anywhere from 2,500 to 5,000 soldiers, sailors, airmen, marine, whatever you want to call it. We're pushing money down to them and allowing them to decide what they buy, because you brought it up. Like, they can't buy rifles or tanks. That's not the point. But the kid on the ground who actually has to fly this drone or has to use this piece of software or this computer equipment, let them decide. So let's turn it into a marketplace of ideas, right? So the units will figure out what works. What I would love to see is an ability to crosstalk. And they all talk now. They all have their Signal chats. You guys use Signal up here or WhatsApp?
Yeah.
Both. I'm a Signal guy.
Both.
I think I got hacked today. Chinese Communist Party, I'm talking to you. So, there's this wonderfully vibrant community of people talking to each other. So that's where we're going. And let's be honest, in my country, we spend $1 trillion. $1 trillion a year. That's a lot. That's USD.
Yeah.
That's a lot of bacon there. And what we're talking about is taking a fraction of that, pushing it down to the users in the field, giving them the opportunity to buy, and let the marketplace of good ideas decide. And then have that go back up, and then that becomes the program that is adopted by the military.
And those young men and women, they have all kinds of great organic ideas and insights. Like this generation, really, it is mind-numbing to see.
When you were out
how
in the
much
field, you would just see that. You were
Oh,
like,
yeah.
Oh my gosh!
Well,
we're so lucky.
They also had the skill set that I couldn't believe came in some cases, and this is not a diminutive comment, from video games. So being able to work in virtual realities gave them skills for space and being able to look at a particular topographical map and say, okay, this is the type of drone that we should use there. This is the mine clearance material that we need. And those skill sets, some of which are being taught on university campuses. A lot of companies are using that type of virtual training now. It was talked about today by one of the fighter pilots, how they don't have to log hundreds of hours anymore in a cockpit. They can get the same, and in some cases even more challenging environments through these virtual training systems and these simulators that they use. So it is a brave new world for soldiers and sailors and airmen and women and special forces. They're doing, they're in very, very dangerous and difficult situations, but there's a calmness and a confidence about them in our military and definitely in yours that should be very heartening for Canadians.
Yeah, it really is.
Peter,
I just want to say, I played Atari Pong growing up. We're kind of the same age.
Yeah, no,
I wasn't very good. So when
Tetris was my game.
Oh, Tetris!
Yeah,
I couldn't think three-dimensionally like that. I gotta tell you though, asteroids. I became a master
the best.
of that.
That was the best.
I'm just saying.
You don't know anything.
Yeah, you guys are really aging yourself in this
think
context.
about that. It was a two-dimensional thing. It was so slow, and these kids today had this spatial orientation and this finesse that just blows my mind. I think we're in really good shape. I'll just say we got to free them, and let them create and embrace them. But that's not probably helpful to the narrative that we're supposed to be establishing.
But sorry to interrupt, but okay. I do want to pick up on a point that you made about the interoperability and just the trust between the Canadian Armed Forces and the American Armed Forces.
Yeah.
At Colorado Springs, we have a binational command, so rotating command, and we have NORTHCOM, but we are so integrated that on 9/11, which is a seminal moment in our lifetime, it was a Canadian that was in the chair when the decision was taken to close the airspace over North America. In the field in Afghanistan, we have once again, and noting that we stand on the shoulders of previous generations of military, but that type of trust, relationship, shared intelligence, same with Five Eyes, this is what makes us stronger in the face of adversity. Like trust, joined up, being able to work together. but it also has to be taken into consideration when we're buying equipment.
Right.
And when we're working
Yeah.
together on the decision to solve the next big problem of what our adversaries might be doing.
Well, and that's a perfect segue into my next question, which
Okay.
is, that was perfect, Peter. Thank you. You couldn't have set that up better. How do we, continue or improve engagement in the Arctic with our partners to the south? What does that look like in terms of defense?
Well, I quickly referenced some form of missile defense. We've had what they used to call the dew line that was across the Arctic. Now, with the advancement of modern technology, it's going to be a system of systems, Emily. It's going to be ground-based. Obviously, with the opening of Arctic waters, we're going to have not just submarines and traditional warships in the water. We're going to have sensors. So think of a string of pearls. And some of the universities are doing a lot of really interesting and important innovation in this regard. And we talk constantly about dual use, multi-use. These type of systems are not only for defensive and military purposes, but they can measure fish stocks. They can look at coastal erosion, thickness of ice, water temperatures. They can do all of those things and share that data with satellites. We did not get into the subject of space, but here's another generational reference, the next frontier. Right? We're going to be using space and satellite for all kinds of reasons. Canada's doing amazing things when it comes to ISR and being able to have, views over mass, water, land, airspace. All of this has to be synced up. All of this data has to be interpreted. So when we talk about the Arctic, one of the big challenges is just that. It's the vastness. And small population, water, land, temperature, darkness, all of those things are challenging domains, but it's technology and it's being able to use the data that we collect to make in real-time decisions. We can't do it alone. We have to do this with the United States. We have to get past any of the frictions that might exist. And these are a moment in time. We've had moments in time before where presidents and prime ministers didn't get along. I mean, we had a president famously grab one of the prime ministers by the lapels and shake him. We've been there. This is a unique moment, but it will pass. We have to recognize that institutions, military, our justice systems, our intelligence gathering, all of these people, institutions, they get along, and they'll continue to get along. And that's an important part of it, the human aspect of the relationships that we have with the United States. They're family,
Right.
and we will prevail. And technology can only help in terms of meeting those challenges in the Arctic and elsewhere.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So
That's a long answer.
it was a
I'm
long
sorry.
answer, but it was perfect. A big emphasis on technology, building on historical relationships. Chris, do you have a different take or anything to add to that?
I'm super intrigued by, U.S. President Ronald Reagan was roundly criticized for his idea. They called it Star Wars. It was called the Strategic Defense Initiative. That was kind of the first crack at using technology to improve our defenses against missile attack. And in many ways, it was a little early to need. Wasn't early to need. The technology wasn't there. And he was roundly criticized, and some of it was a deception operation to, freak out the Soviets, which kind of worked. They went broke and fell apart.
That's right.
Some would argue that there was a direct relationship to Star Wars and the defeat of the Soviet Union.
Well, and Star Wars had a scary sound to it, right? And it was the weaponizing and the misinformation, really, that was going on at the time. That it spooked a lot of people.
With now the latest initiative from down south is Golden Dome, which really is ultimately about, it all comes down to sensors and how to pass information, which you already described. The biggest difference now is the technology is there. This is absolutely a solvable problem.
Do you think it's close, though? I mean, Israel does this with their Iron Dome, so we know that there's a working model there. But I guess my question is way beyond my understanding, but a space as massive
I know.
as the Arctic, it seems to me that's going to be a bigger fish to fry.
But with sensors, I talked about the $15,000 sensor. We actually can make sensors for dollars and just seed entire areas. So the key challenge right now is how to integrate all that stuff, which you highlighted. I don't know. I think we can figure it out.
There's a lot of smart people.
Ending to the question?
Yeah.
I think we can figure it out, yeah.
There's a lot of smart people that are turning their attention to these problems. The other thing we haven't really touched on yet, but I know it's top of mind for many Canadians and Americans, is the involvement of our Indigenous people.
You're reading my mind, Peter. That was my next question. We know that Indigenous communities are integral to the North.
Sure.
So how does the Canadian government engage with them and involve them in this defense strategy moving forward in the Arctic?
Well, we do it from start to finish. We do it as we're moving down this path of using innovation, embracing the challenge that is the Arctic. They have to be central to not just consultation, but decision making. The Arctic Rangers are a very unique part of the Canadian Armed Forces. So they're Indigenous regiments they're often called the eyes and ears of the Arctic, but they have generational knowledge to pass on. Example, you've heard of the Franklin expedition, right? A British expeditionary naval exercise that was to chart the Northwest Passage. They got lost, stranded, they died, they ate each other, it was awful. And if the Canadian government, successive governments, had listened to the Indigenous people, they would have known exactly where the ships were. They spent countless dollars and hours looking for these ships over multiple generations. And the people of that region knew exactly where those ships were. And they were proven correct. So that's just a fingernail clipping of an example how we need to benefit from their knowledge and share openly what our plans are. To help them and to work with them and to the benefit of all. I mean, the resources alone in the Arctic are massively beneficial to Canadians, but massively vulnerable to what other countries' plans might be. They're dropping sensors up there. They're looking to disrupt and distract from what our plans may be.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Do you have any insights on anything that would sort of be similar in the United States on, really integral communication with communities that could support with defense strategy across the U.S.?
I can talk definitively. I started my own company recently, and I work here with Dragonfly, which is an unbelievable drone company.
Talk a little bit about Dragonfly, because people should hear about
been here
this.
27 years, so it's not a flash in the pan. Like right now, everybody and his sister or brother has their own drone company making a quadcopter. We've been in the business for 27 years. First use for law enforcement, our inaugural drone is at the Air and Space Museum in Washington, D.C., which is pretty cool because I'm from Washington, D.C., and take my kids through there. I'm like, I'm with them. It's pretty motivating. But you asked an earlier question about, hey, multi-use, what if you're not in the defense industry? Is an idea to get into it? Took us 26 years to get our first contract with the Department of Defense. It takes endurance, takes stubbornness, capital. You just going through it, and finally everything's converging together after all these years. But it's just, and it is the premier. It's one of the premier drone manufacturers in the world, and it's here in Canada. And I'll tell you what, I see no reason that in the coming years, as the market sorts out and all these companies converge and all this, Dragonfly is going to be, there are going to be 5 or 6 huge drone manufacturers. Crazy. But remember, that's school of hard knocks. The scar tissue that the team has incurred from all of these lessons learned, figuring out how to do this. My company is a drone company, and what we look at, and I think it's kind of maybe helpful to those thinking about, where do I put in my production? Is this something I should get into?
And even what's the first step?
Yeah,
right? Where do I even start?
Oh gosh, that is such a wonderful question, and that's probably kind of maybe the ultimate nugget of this whole thing is like, hey, okay, we've got this great company that's out doing 3D manufacturing. It's like, I'm all about this Golden Dome thing. I can make an interceptor, or I can make a sensor, or I can make a casing for something. Like, how do I get into this? Yeah, that's the challenge, right? And that's why it's so important that communities that see the opportunity to bring in industry or enhance existing industry, have to take a really, really active role. It's not that expensive, but to understand the defense ecosystem, I'll only talk about the United States. I won't, offend you all by talking about how acquisition works here, but it's a whole different language. I talked about the federal acquisition regulation. You have to have like a platoon of attorneys, no offense, counselor, in a good way, but it's just not something you can chat GPT this thing. Like, hey, I want to get a defense contract, 18 days later when you get through the list. So it's really, really important. My experience has been, we work in South Dakota, we work in Oklahoma. These are not traditional defense hubs in the United States. Nobody goes like, oh, the defense industry. Oh yeah, it's in it's in South Dakota. There are communities that are partnered, and it's really interesting. There's a formula is setting in. And I'll give you two. One is the state, local, that partners with university or community college for training, education, but also then kind of does economic development and enhancement. So the U.S. government now is providing seed funding for non-diluted capital for small companies that need to scale. The government says, we really like what you're doing. We realize you can't fund $35 million production facility. We're going to give you capital. The expectation is you'll produce 1,000 units or whatever the number is. Okay, so there are a few states in the United States that are like, hey, wow, our burnt out inner city that was emasculated by globalization. We're recovering from that. We see an opportunity now to pull technology in, and it's not going to be a GM plant or a Ford plant. It's going to be, it's going to be a smaller company, a smaller footprint that's going to get into defense technology. So we go to the places where the major defense contractors aren't. And that's why I think this is just a wonderful place. Also, obviously, I don't need to tell your listeners, like everything kind of converges here. You've got your lines of communication, meaning roads, railways, seafaring. So the other one is we extensively use our Native American lands. Some of the tribes made a strategic decision years ago we are going to establish this is, in my case, a drone or an autonomous testing area. They invested the capital to learn about it and to instrument these areas. So now that's where we go to test our equipment, because they don't have to follow all the crazy federal laws. It's safe. I don't mean to be like, flippant about that. I mean, it's extremely well run, but they recognized way before the federal government did that things were changing and that they could establish like a center of excellence. So that's really like when we don't go to a federal military training facility. You want to know why? Because the major defense contractors always bump us because they know that we're competing against them, and they're like, oh, we have a very high priority test we have to do. So, and it's outrageously expensive. So where do we go?
So the nation made a center of excellence. And is it one nation that created that?
Yeah, I mean, there are numerous tribal areas that have established autonomous testing areas. What we're trying to do, when I say we, the community writ large, is how do we isn't it great that South Dakota, we have this lovely training area. We have one of the Great Lakes that does maritime and undersea autonomy. And then we have another place in Michigan that does ground-based robots and whatnot. Like, wouldn't it be cool if we could knit all these together so this drone could fly to the lake, do maritime stuff, or vice versa? So that's kind of the next phase. But that's we are pushed off of federal training ranges just because we're small and it doesn't support us.
We have the potential in Canada, Chris, to link up on our military bases in a similar way, but not escaping the inevitable reach of government to regulate and to interrupt sometimes that activity. But I think one of the lessons of COVID, Emily, that occurs to me that is also instructive is the ability to pivot certain industries and utilize existing facilities that maybe are no longer making ketchup, or they're no longer manufacturing something else, but the facility can be switched over for some of this great innovation.
So on that point, for facilities that are kind of dual use, can we touch a little bit on dual use infrastructure? Is that
Sure.
okay? We can go into that a little bit.
You go ahead.
Well,
That's a
more
good
so,
question.
we know it's a very high value, high impact. So how can Alberta sort of, integrate policies to take advantage of the opportunity for dual use infrastructure? Any suggestions, and then any case studies from the U.S., Chris, would be great.
So, Chris mentioned lawyers are good at some things, looking at contracts. Consultants and the type of advocacy work is a big part of tying together government programs, and there are provincial, federal programs that are designed to help identify the needs for dual use, military and civilian and commercial use. And so that's one of the starting points is, you need the capital to get your company up and running. You need to identify where your market is. There an external market into the United States or Europe or Asia Pacific? And I think, sadly, I say, Canadian companies have very often had to go out into the world and prove themselves before their own government will make those investments and buy the product. And Canadians, I think, should be aware of that fact. I think they want, and there's this movement now to buy Canadian. And so there's a momentum that's happening. There's this cataclysmic realization we need to do more things for ourselves and manufacture them here, not just for military use. And so that wake-up call is occurring now. And I think Alberta's sort of really, again, identified this as one of their priorities. The provincial government is pushing in that regard. How do we harness this energy and make it happen? It's going to take persistence. And Chris's example of having to push, I hope it won't take 26 years for some of our Canadian companies to do that. We have fewer primes, like we have fewer big military companies in Canada. They're a little more modest, and I would say respectfully, they're a little more approachable. And they are looking for new ideas that can add value to what they currently do. I'll take the Irving Shipyard as one example, and then I'll cede the floor to Chris. But it comes back to this idea that the systems, they have to be able to talk to each other. And they have to be able to, it's an overused word now, but they have to be interoperable. They've got to be able to be on the same frequency and share data and be able to have lethal effect in some cases. So that smaller, more agile marketplace, I think, does create greater opportunities for small, medium-sized enterprises to fit in and to come with solutions and say, hey, we've observed the way that you've been doing things. We've got a better way. Or we can bolt something on to what you're currently doing and improve the outcomes. So I think it's an exciting time. I think it's, and the spirit of innovation here in Alberta, again, lends itself to more of those companies being able to get their products out there and to talk to people. It comes back to relationships, time and time again. Relationships between Canada and the US, military and otherwise, business to business. Canadians are polite. Canadians, are also forceful. And we don't often talk about our military as a warrior culture, but we've never gone to other countries to conquer, but when we show up, we do the business as good as anybody else.
Right. Okay.
And that need is there again for us to get things moving, to work with others, and it's the same in business. It's hard work and perseverance.
Okay, so identifying the need and improving interoperability and moving forward with it as quickly as possible. Okay, Chris?
I was just going to highlight as well, the investment community, right now the major investment thesis are anything AI is going to make you a quadrillion Canadian dollars tomorrow.
That's got to be like a couple thousand American.
But the multi-use defense technology sector is hot as well. Primarily software, autonomy, rocket engines, kinetics, and some of the smaller things that, like, we're going to be building millions of quadcopters. There are 4 little silly motors on each one. Somebody has to make them. Right now they're all made in China. The investment community recognizes that this is a hot market and is willing to invest, and here's where I'll go with it. It's not going to, we all want peace and prosperity, but right now we're in a very transformational time, geostrategically, geoeconomically. Everything's shifting. Unfortunately, the defense sector is not going to decrease in size anytime soon. So, and then we have to reindustrialize and recapitalize our entire militaries. Ours specifically would be hypocritical of me to say anything about yours. That's your job. So this investment thesis works. This investment thesis is solid. Now, the other thing is the government can come in with just some very discrete programs, not these major, we're going to give you $20 billion, I'll take it, don't get me wrong. But really, if you can just get a little bit of capital that shows the government is serious about your effort, you can, and then the investors are going to flood in, and you can bridge it. So what we've seen in the United States with my company and others that I've worked for and with is there are a handful of programs that are willing to provide you non-diluted capital, very small amounts, but enough to signal the market that you're a player and you have a future, and then that causes the private sector to flood in. So that's where that seems to be working very, very well right now in the United States until it doesn't, because the market will ultimately decide who wins and loses.
Perfect. Thank you, Chris.
And finding those sort of niche areas too, I think, is really key for a lot of Canadian companies right now, Alberta companies. Where is this going? Back to the earlier analogy, where's the puck going to be? We're not going to be in the semiconductor business anytime soon, but there's a big need for semiconductors. We've talked about reshoring and bringing things back to Canada, but some of the basic infrastructure needs too, buildings.
Yes, absolutely.
I mean, there's a great company here called Modus, right? Making these mobile and sometimes even like building blocks. You can build things, and they can be for the Board of Education, or they can be for the Department of National Defense. And you can take them to remote places where you can't build 12 months of the year because of the very challenging environment. So there's a basic infrastructure need, building roads that connect communities but also allow the military to do what they do, and space. As I talked about, we're now seeing space evolving where we have launch capability. There's a great company called Maritime Launch Service in Nova Scotia. All of those, and we can't do it all, but we can certainly do more than we're doing now. And there's a great crystallization of a moment in which Canadians, I think, are highly motivated.
Perfect. Thank you. Those were great closing remarks from both of you. I appreciate it. We heard great things about, increased opportunity, decentralization of procurement, and how Alberta is really has an advantage in this sector, and we hope to move it forward as quickly as we possibly can. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you so much, Peter. Thank you so much, Chris. There'll be a little sign on your screen. Feel free to subscribe to Alberta Council News, and we look forward to seeing you at our next webinar.